Hello, and welcome to another episode of Out of the Fire podcast. And today I'm glad to have Mark Scrimshire on the call. Mark, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hey, yes, great to be here, Gene. So, Mark Scrimshire, I'm Chief Interoperability Officer at Onyx. It's onyxhealth.io, where I really oversee the Onyx OS platform that delivers HL7 FHIR interoperability to primarily payers, but increasingly also to providers.
Fantastic. I want to start out a little bit about your journey.
Yeah.
Mark, take us back before TEFCA, before FHIR. Like, what problem were you trying to solve? If you had to summarize like your 20 years of interoperability experience.
Oh, that's a big one. If I really go back, let's go back to about 2009. So we had the American Recovery Act. So there was a lot of activity around things like Blue Button 1.0 at CMS, which was basically you can download your 3 years of history, basically a text file. And I've known people that said, I did that and I printed it out and it was 1,700 pages and you couldn't really make sense of it. Around that time, I'd started an unconference series, really trying to bring patients, providers, policymakers, developers together. And we had some amazing events, had people like Todd Park, the then CTO of the US. I've had Anish Chopra, the first CTO of the USA, and others presenting and, discussing different aspects. Involved in that while I was also actually working for a payer. Took me on a journey and obviously meeting a lot of people. I also went off to 3M Health Information Systems for a period, taking all of their products to the cloud, where they're very much the backbone of payments in the hospitals space. Something like 80% of US patients use them's products. And so that was around the ICD 9 and 10 transition. I was then asked to basically go to CMS as an entrepreneur in residence. So I was part of the US Department of Health and Human Services, their Idea Lab. So I was recruited by Brian Sivak. And the objective was to go into CMS and build an API that patients or Medicare fee-for-service beneficiaries could use. And so that was around 2013, 14. So at that time, HL7 FHIR had started to evolve. You had the Argonaut project doing some really cool stuff. And I'll say, being lazy, why invent your own API when there's potential of using something else that other people will be implementing? So I got involved with HL7. I actually helped define the resource at the core of the Karen Blue Button and CMS Blue Button. That was the explanation and benefit resource. I've since become a co-chair of financial management. Anyway, we basically built CMS's Blue Button 2.0 using FHIR as the basis. Initially, the STU3, and then after I left, it went to the release 4. After launching Blue Button 2 in 2018, I could see the writing on the wall for payers, where CMS would basically say, look what we've done, you can do it too. And, one of the reasons for going there is when the largest payer in the world changes the way they do things, it tends to drag the industry along. So, their $1.5 trillion or so that they spend a year putting out to payers, to Medicaid and so on, gives them a fair bit of clout. And so that's where we saw the original interoperability rule, CMS 9115, back in 2020. Well, I'd basically left CMS, the company I was with, which basically spun out Onyx. We partnered with Microsoft on the day that CMS announced Blue Button 2 and built this platform, which is basically a FHIR interoperability platform originally targeted for payers. And we built solutions that could support the compliance with the interoperability regs. And so we've sold that and delivered that to a number of plans. We managed to earn a vesting class for interoperability this year. And we're now building the 0057 solutions. I'm actually retained by HL7. So I'm actually writing payer data exchange and leading the PlanNet formulary attribution and payer data exchange work group for the Da Vinci Accelerator. So not only writing the specs, but also implementing them for clients. So that's been sort of my journey. So at Onyx here, I'm really overseeing our overall product roadmap and how we can help promote interoperability that ultimately helps us as patients. So bit of a long-winded story, but there you go.
Thank you. Thank you, Mark. And thank you for being that unsung hero of interoperability. And people may be surprised then how many people were instrumental in building that, but you're definitely one of them. And what was the first time you actually saw data actually move between systems and thought, this could change everything? Is, I guess, the kind of a story I could tell about myself is, when I initially got into healthcare, I always thought about the concept of data being available to more than just people inside the organizations.
Yeah, yeah.
Having been a, analyst and developer and a manager of teams in large healthcare organizations, including payers and providers, having all that data at my fingertips was something that I was very fortunate to have. And at the same time, it was very frustrating because, for example, my team would have all the analytics in the world, right? And
Yeah, yeah.
then all of that data would go to potentially quality managers or other provider systems, if you go to doctors' offices or care managers, who honestly didn't have time to do anything with it. And
Right.
I, as a father, having two children of my own, was just flabbergasted that none of this information is available for us to manage our family's health. So, um, this is something that I would love to get your take on. What was the first time you actually saw that data move and you were like, "Oh, this is what we need to make this change happen"?
Well, this taken aside, there's actually a movement out there called the Walking Gallery of Healthcare, where there are jackets painted that tell a story. And I've actually got a jacket from about when it first started. It was like one of the first 10 jackets painted that actually has a blue button, a white button, and a green button on them. And that goes back in that era, 2010, where CMS and the VA had introduced Blue Button 1, where you could actually grab the text file. Actually got together on a hackathon with a friend, and we actually built the idea of I could take this information down, I could go through it, de-identify content, and republish it. Basically, I could donate my health data. So that was really the first time, thinking we've really got to get data into the hands of us as patients, as consumers, as caregivers through running Health Camp, the unconference. The number of times I talked to caregivers or patients. There was one mother who had a son with a rare disease that maybe there's 1,000 kids across the world with that disease. And she was actually more informed about the disease than any of the providers she would go to. So why shouldn't we have the data? And now in this era of AI, the things that you can do when you've got that data and pull it down and have AI help you make sense of it, that even can benefit providers if you can get it back there. So those very early days of just saying, look, this technology called the internet and APIs and actually make data available rather than it being locked up with specs where you have to pay to even go and look at the spec. So that was really the driver of campus, and seeing how HL7 FHIR emerged as being open source, so I could go look at the specs and it's very much a community. So I took the idea of we need this explanation of benefit to be able to put this complex claims out for fee-for-service beneficiaries. And we turned that into something where now there's something like 60 million Medicare beneficiaries can download that information. And when we were launching that, you were then seeing, for example, insurance companies that do offer Medicare Advantage coming along and tapping into that. So that I, as a member, as a beneficiary, could let the plan look at the data of my claims and come back and say, hey, we've got a dozen plans, but this one's the best one for you based upon your history, right? This is going to minimize your spend on your pharmacy medications or on your medical claims. So also other examples where one company was having beneficiaries be able to use their application, it would suck down their health history. And if they qualified for a research program, lo and behold, like a week later, an Apple Watch arrived at their doorstep for them to wear and take part in the study. So you can see these things that it just is gradually evolving. And so as we've gone to drive Medicare Advantage and Medicaid to make this data available, there's still value in members, patients, caregivers being able to get their hands on the data. At the moment, probably still, it's only those that are really incented to do that, the activated patients that will, because we've still got so many areas of abrasion or friction, right, that we've got to address. But we're gradually knocking down those walls. It just takes longer than you want, but it actually happens quicker than you expect.
Do you think we are over-regulated or under-regulated in interoperability?
I think the approach to the regulations have evolved over time. So I can go back to like 2012, and when you think about the HIPAA Act of 1996, I've known top privacy lawyers come and say, I was trying to get my records from a name a provider, and the receptionist is saying, we can't do that because of HIPAA, right? We've now evolved beyond that to say, no, HIPAA was about portability, not necessarily privacy, right? And you do have a right to your records. And that's how things like Blue Button 2 were able to take off, because yes, we have a right to the data. And really that was a bridgehead, right? Now what we're seeing with the latest regulation, everybody's focusing on prior authorization, which is a great thing. But the fact that you'll be able to have your provider get at your health history from your payer. I describe the payers, they don't necessarily have the depth of data, but I call it the connectivity of your care journey, because they know everywhere you've been. And that provides the ability to maybe go and then tap into particular places to actually get more detailed clinical data. So I think we'll see far more data start flowing through the system as we get to 2027. And that's going to be a good thing. There'll be more clinical data coming into payers, which will be available to the members. There'll be more data that can flow to the practitioners. And when you decide to move, because we're fickle souls, from one plan to another, you'll be able to say, go get my data, bring it forward, right? You'll be able to see my prior authorizations. So don't hassle me about going through prior auth again, just because it's already been approved with that previous payer. So you know more about me, you can serve me better. And from the payer's perspective, it makes sense. Instead of flying blind with new patients, new members, they'll have better insight to what care programs do we need to get them on, rather than waiting for them to turn up in the emergency room and now work out how you have to get them back on a decent outcome path.
Absolutely.
So the bottom line is we need these regulations. Payers will implement stuff because those mandates are there. They want to be compliant. They do not want to be in the position where CMS says, do you provide these APIs? And you say no, and at some point is CMS going to say, well, you don't qualify as a plan, right? So compliance is a very useful tool. What I'm expecting to see as you look at prior auth, and we're already seeing this, is that yes, only these regulated plans need to provide an API for prior auth, and the providers are not forced to use it except for MIPS eligible practitioners. Now, okay, so imagine the scenario that I'm a Medicare, Part A, B beneficiary, and I can go to my provider, and if there's a prior auth needed, they can shoot it off, or if I'm on a commercial plan, to the Medicare Advantage plan, and get a response in 15 seconds or less that says they don't need a prior auth. Let's get on with it. And then, someone comes in from this on a commercial plan from the same payer. And now they've got to get the fax out and send a fax to get an answer. How long's that going to last, right? So there's many payers are looking at saying, yes, I'm going to implement this for my regulated plans, but what's it going to take to do it for my entire member base? So I can do it for my commercial members as well. And that's what's going to happen. So we're going to see prior authorization going from a mandated spend to really a business transformation spend. So, but you need standards. You need people to be able to adopt standards so that you can move this. You mentioned earlier in your background of the challenges you have in actually getting that data exchanged. The advantage of things like bulk FHIR. At Onyx, we're building a product around that, what we call One Connect. Use those bulk APIs because what it effectively does is it flips the script. If you think about how pilots happen, right? Let's do this pilot to be able to get more data and do whatever it happens to be. And you go and implement it because the provider you want to work with is on Epic. And then you say, oh, that's brilliant. We got great results. Let's roll it out. My next provider's on Oracle or Athena or Meditech. And now I've got to go and do the same grunt work to get connected. What FHIR really enables us to do there is, if you're leveraging a standard FHIR interface, is what I call flip the script. Instead of spending 80% of your time trying to get your hands on the data and 20% of the time working on what can I really do with it, you flip that to, let's spend 20% of the time getting the data, and now let's spend 80% really making use of that data. That's what's starting to happen.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a really great analogy to the classic kind of like situation where data scientists spend 80% of their time transforming the data and
Just
20% of the
wrangling
time
data.
creating.
Yeah.
So it's applicable to the whole industry as well. There's a belief that incentives, not APIs, are the problem, specifically for the prior auth. And we had an interesting discussion actually in the other episode with Scott Rasinio, and he mentioned that it would be great if providers and payers just enable data sharing to get the data liquidity and data moving between them so that they could enable all these different use cases, not just one by one or just for the Medicare plans, just for the required check the box things. What is your take on that?
I've been driving at this problem for a number of years now, and it's not a technology problem, right? It's really the core of all of this is really around trust, right? Do I trust as a member my plan? Does the plan trust the provider? Does the provider trust the payer? Right? That's the challenge we've got. So, at the moment, you've got a lot of payers looking at TEFCA and saying, do I really want to go into all of that? There's a lot of things that I don't really want to do. I've got to support all of these different formats where the specific things I want to actually accomplish. So we've got that issue. But we've got to solve it, because if we're really going to get these APIs to work, we've got to get them to work at scale. To work at scale, think about it, they're secure APIs. So you've got to have a way of getting a set of credentials to be able to use the APIs. If you look at payer, let's take the simple issue, payer to payer. There's basically around pick the number, whether it's 300 or 900 payers that are going to be impacted by this around the country. Do you want to be spending manual effort that can amount to days in getting those connections with each of those payers? And how do you know it's really a payer on the other end of an email, right? So there's that challenge. Well, then magnify that by 1,000, because you've got to do it with providers as well, right? So we have to find a way of being able to set up a trust framework that we agree to buy into, that then you can be issued with basically a certificate that says we can now exchange data. And that's going to need to cover the points that Scott is really making around the data use agreements. You've got to have those in place to make that happen. We've got the technology to make it work. There's implementation guides out there that can tell you how you can do this stuff. It's the willingness of folks to come together. And to some extent for us as technologists, we've got the challenge of trying to express the cost benefit to the decision makers in the payers, in the healthcare systems, that they need to buy into this technology, right? Whether it's to do digital identities that allow you to know that I am really who I say I am, or whether it's for an organization to know that another organization can do the same workflow, so payer to payer or prior auth or provider access. That's what we've got to crack. And it really does make sense. Back in I think it was like 2018, I did a presentation at FHIR Dev Days about doing effectively automated registration. And we actually demonstrated how we could have done this with Blue Button. And that's basically what's been rolled into the fast security IG with UDAP, right? As a layer on top of OAuth 2, that you're basically providing a certificate to say, yeah, I'm genuine. And that then allows you to automatically register your app. That's what we've got to solve. And the fact is, if I looked at the Blue Button example, and if I was a third-party app developer and I've got to go to, 100 plans around the country to be able to get connected allow a member to pull data into my app, I'm going to spend like 5 or 6 days, it gets to be like that, making each connection happen. And payers are on the other side of that, having to do the vetting. And that's an awful lot of time that's required. It literally turns into man years, when you do the math on the number of bilateral connections that are necessary. And so we got to find the way of getting these trust frameworks in place that enable you to securely share what's necessary.
What happens when AI agents start pulling from TEFCA and patient access APIs? Is that
It's going to get,
a dream or is that a nightmare from your perspective?
I think, well, every technology potentially has a downside that you can use it for evil. It depends on what your drivers are, I suppose. But we're already seeing in the patient community, the patient empowerment community are already using AI to analyze the data they can get their hands on. And it's helping to provide insights when you've got enormous volumes of data. And so if you think about somebody with multiple comorbidities, seeing multiple providers that are not all in the same system, how can you pull all of those threads together? And there is certainly value there that used responsibly, you can get some real value from AI. There's a lot of arguments, I think, going around as saying, well, why do we need standards if we've got AI? But what really, the two things work together. By having standards which have standard terminologies in use, you start to get that towards that semantic interoperability. And so if everybody's talking about, how much electricity we're going to need to be able to power AI. Well, the harder AI has to work, the more power it needs to generate. If you can provide more standardized data structures, they can learn more quickly. They can deduce the information. It's like, why do I want to produce, literally talking to somebody today saying, we'll turn stuff into a PDF in order to give to a quality management vendor because they use OCR to turn that into structured data, right? You think about the resources needed to run that NLP and OCR, whereas they've actually got the structured data and it could go in as structured data. It'd be more efficient. It would just be more efficient for AI to do what it needs to do. So
yeah. Yeah, and it's interesting. I just came back from the FHIR camp in Portugal that I got a chance
lucky
to
devil.
interface. I got a chance to interface with a whole number of people, and it's just amazing. One
I
of
wish I
the
could have been
things,
there. Yeah.
yes, it would have been great, Mark. But I hear there's one going to be happening next year, so please see if you can make it. And question was, do we still need FHIR even in the age of AI, right? And we had a great
And I think we
conversation
do.
with Mark Kramer and Josh Mundell about conversational interoperability with the power of the LLMs to parse through text and get meaning and understandings. And we as humans we're able to communicate directly without necessarily, and we understand each other most of the time. I think the overarching answer is yes, we do. We do want structure and we do want FHIR standards because without that, I think that your point in terms of that it takes much more resource intensive calculations on the part of AI, but also that there is not a lot of structure to just the way healthcare is practiced.
Yeah.
So by enabling the structure, you're almost helping to get to the next big unlock, which is really moving from just data liquidity or data sharing to meaning and gathering insights
Yeah.
from the data for all of these use cases, right? So I think if you look at it where we don't need AI to decode which codes were in a node, right? We already do that, and the systems are capable to do that much less expensive way than using AI for. but we do need AI to help us gather meaning and insight so that we could get better outcomes.
Well, I'll give you a tale back from the ICD-9 to ICD-10 transition. It's involved with, on the periphery of building technology, basically using NLP and so forth, to be able to do that translation from ICD-9 to ICD-10. And you got to the point where it was hard to really improve because the drivers around doing that evaluation, you had different coding experts that couldn't agree on what the right interpretation was, right? So you could get that situation, I think, with AI. If there is confusion about how to interpret things, you're not going to get a standard answer. You're always going to have this area of doubt. So, AI is not necessarily the solution to everything.
Yeah. All right. Well, Mark Scrimshire, thank you. You're the quiet force behind all the data plumbing that we have in place right now in America. So thank you for all your contributions. And I'm holding out judgment on TEFCA and the success of all the different use cases, but we got our fingers crossed and everything seems to be proceeding right now. So thank you for your time.
No problem. We have to make it happen. So it's the community that will make it happen. It's it is a team effort. But thanks for having me on. It's been great to chat with you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mark.